10 in the morning, and the empty document has been glowing on the screen since 9. You tell yourself you will start as soon as the feeling of motivation arrives. The feeling does not arrive, no matter how long you sit there waiting for it. Instead, a heavier sensation settles in, a quiet dread that makes the blank space seem even larger. The task itself has not changed, yet the longer you wait, the more impossible it becomes. Somewhere inside you, there is a stubborn belief that action requires a special kind of readiness. Without that spark, the first step feels too heavy, the first sentence too risky. Maybe you scroll through your phone, hoping the break will reset something. But the break only stretches the distance between you and the work waiting on the screen. This moment contains a hidden question that shapes far more than a single morning. Why does the feeling we wait for so often refuse to arrive until after we have already begun? Most of us grow up with a simple idea about how motivation works. We imagine motivation as a switch that flips on before we move, energizing us into action. According to this belief, the right feeling must come first, and the behavior follows. But that idea struggles to explain the scene at the desk where readiness never showed up. If the feeling must come first, why does waiting for it so often produce nothing but more waiting? Psychologists who study human behavior have noticed something that turns this belief inside out. Motivation is not only a cause of action, it can also be a result of action. The very movement you are avoiding is one of the most reliable ways to produce the feeling you need. Think about the last time you truly dreaded starting something difficult. Perhaps it was a difficult conversation, a tax form, or a workout after a long break. Before you began, the weight of the task felt enormous, and your emotional energy was nowhere to be found. Then something small broke the spell, a tiny action you barely noticed at the time. You opened the document. You wrote one clumsy sentence. You put on your running shoes. Within a few minutes, the dread did not disappear entirely, but it stopped growing. A few minutes after that, you were moving, and the task felt less like a wall and more like a path. The feeling you had been waiting for showed up, but it arrived inside the work rather than before it. This pattern is so common that researchers have given it careful attention. A team of researchers studying work motivation analyzed thousands of diary entries from professionals. They found that the single most powerful predictor of a motivated inner work life was making progress in meaningful work, even a small step. The days when people moved forward, however slightly, were the days they felt most energized and committed. So the common belief that we must feel ready before we act has the sequence reversed. Motivation often does not start in your head and flow down to your hands. It starts in your hands and flows upward as your brain registers that movement is happening. One explanation for this comes from a simple truth about how we understand ourselves. We do not always have direct access to our own attitudes, so we observe our own behavior and draw conclusions, much like watching another person. When you notice yourself taking action toward a goal, your brain quietly updates your self-image. I am the kind of person who writes, because look, I am writing right now. That shift in identity, small as it is, can generate the emotional fuel that was missing a moment earlier. There is also something about an unfinished task that gently nudges the mind. Decades ago, a psychologist noticed that people remembered interrupted tasks better than completed ones. An open loop creates a quiet mental tension that seeks resolution, like a song that stops before the final chord. That tension is uncomfortable, but it can be transformed into forward motion once you take the first step. Beginning a task converts a shapeless anxiety about the whole thing into a specific problem you can work on. The blank page is terrifying because it represents infinite possibilities and no direction. One bad sentence gives you something to fix, and fixing is far easier than inventing from nothing. This is why the smallest possible action can break a paralysis that hours of waiting could not. Therapists who work with people experiencing low mood have known this for a long time. A treatment called behavioral activation is built on the insight that action can lift mood even when motivation feels entirely absent. Instead of waiting for the desire to return, the person gradually re-engages with activities that matter to them. As they do, their mood often improves, not because the situation has changed, but because behavior is feeding back into emotion. The same principle applies to everyday procrastination, though the stakes may feel lower. The idea is not that every action automatically leads to satisfaction or flow. If the task is too large or too unclear, starting can spike anxiety rather than reduce it. That is why breaking a project into the smallest imaginable step is not a gimmick. It is a way to make progress visible. Write one sentence, organize one drawer, make one phone call, and then check how you feel. The step must be so small that your brain does not perceive it as a threat to be avoided. Once you cross that threshold, the resistance often drops because your brain no longer sees inaction as the safer choice. Your nervous system learns through experience that the feared task did not destroy you. But there is a deeper layer to this reversal that changes how we understand the entire struggle. The opening scene at the desk was not really about a missing feeling called motivation. It was about a hidden assumption that has been rehearsed for years. The assumption is that your emotional state must give you permission before you can act. That assumption puts your feelings in charge and gives them veto power over your choices. The person waiting at the screen was not lazy or broken. They were obeying a rule that makes the feeling the gatekeeper. And the gatekeeper was never going to open the door from a distance. This is the quiet tragedy of waiting to feel ready before you begin. The readiness you are waiting for is often built by the very actions you are postponing. No amount of scrolling, worrying, or self-criticism can substitute for the first clumsy movement. The hardest moment in any difficult task is almost always the moment just before you start. Later, when you are deep in the work, you may even forget how hard that first moment was. But the memory of the dread fades, and the next time you face a blank page, the same old belief returns. You think, maybe this time I need to wait for the motivation, because last time I just got lucky. But luck had nothing to do with it, and the sequence is ready to work in exactly the same way again. Here is the insight that changes the meaning of the whole morning at the desk. Motivation is not a prerequisite for meaningful action. It is one of its most reliable products. You do not find motivation by waiting for it. You create it by beginning while the feeling is still absent. The feeling of readiness that never came while you waited appeared once you moved. The act of starting did something that passive waiting could never accomplish. It provided your brain with evidence that change is possible, that the task is survivable, that you are already in motion. Once you have that evidence, the emotional landscape shifts and the weight on your chest begins to lift. The writer at the screen is no longer someone who hopes to write, but someone who is writing. That distinction is small in words and enormous in emotional reality. None of this means that every task will feel effortless once you begin. Some work remains hard, some conversations stay uncomfortable, and some days motivation stays thin. But understanding the sequence frees you from the trap of treating your own hesitation as a permanent truth. You can learn to start before you feel ready, not as an act of grit, but as an act of psychological intelligence. The practical question then becomes how to make starting as easy as possible. Set a timer for 5 minutes and promise yourself you can stop when it rings. Most of the time, you will not want to stop because the resistance has already melted. When you cannot start at all, shrink the step until it feels almost ridiculous. Open the file, type a single word, stand up from the chair, hold the object you have been avoiding. Each small action is not the work itself, but a bridge from paralysis to possibility. And the bridge does not need to be grand. It only needs to be crossed. The screen that was empty at the beginning of this story now holds a few rough sentences. The cursor is no longer blinking in accusation. It is resting behind a half-finished paragraph. The dread has not been defeated by a surge of inspiration. It has been dissolved by movement. You did not wait for the feeling to arrive, and because you began, the feeling found you already working.